Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Today, voices from the student protests in Bangladesh.
This is not about quota anymore. Things would have been about quota before all the bloodshed happened, before our brothers and sisters were dead.
As internet connections gradually come back online, we hear what students experienced and why they say the protests are not over. I'm Malika Bilal, and this is The Take.
I think any Bangladeshi person can recognize the seriousness of this moment, and it really feels like people's frustrations have reached a boiling point. I'm Tamara Khandaker. I'm a producer at The Take based in Toronto. I am Bangladeshi, and I've been following the story really closely for the last couple weeks.
Tamara, it's really good to have you here. You know that we talked about these demonstrations on the podcast last week. Students had been protesting a quota system that reserved 30% of government jobs for the descendants of people who fought for Bangladesh's independence. The protesters wanted those opportunities for everyone. And eventually, the Supreme Court decided to reduce the quotas to 5%. And it seemed like that was a resolution, but apparently not. What are you hearing talking to people there now?
Yeah, as we're learning a lot more about what happened in Bangladesh over the last couple weeks, it seems like this is still very much ongoing. So 6 of the protest coordinators were taken into police custody for their own safety, according to the government. And while in custody, they sent a video message to the media announcing the end of this protest movement.
Now,
since the government has accepted our quota reform demands as per the higher court's verdict, we are withdrawing our programs.
But the coordinators who are still in hiding, they've rejected the statement. They think that it's coerced, and they're vowing to continue the movement. And some of the protesters the team and I had reached out to for the last episode have since gotten back to us. They really want to get their stories out. But some of them are living in fear. They're in hiding. They say that they're being pursued by the police.
This is Prapti Taposhi. I'm a student and an activist. There is complete terror. Every night, I don't sleep. We don't sleep. Police, they are harassing me completely. They are going to my home. They are threatening my father, family, as I don't live with my family. There has been mass abducting by the police. There has been mass arrest by the Bangladeshi police by the order of Bangladeshi government.
I talked to one student named Tasneem, for example, who was involved in the protests, and he only wanted to be identified by his first name.
On the second day of the curfew, some cops went to my house.
He says the cops questioned his parents about his whereabouts, accused him of being a member of the opposition party, which he says he's not.
And when my father refused to give away my location to the cops, they threatened him and warned my father repeatedly about consequences of protesting against this government. And I'm still hiding somewhere else other than my residence for my safety and to avoid being arrested.
And he and other people that I've talked to said that this movement is far from over.
If anything, it's on the rise, actually, even though the government is publishing a narrative that they have fulfilled our demands and the movement should come to an end.
So on the surface, it looks like things have gone back to normal, but it's a really tense situation, and there are more protests that are being planned right now.
It's interesting because we're only able to hear from Tasneem and the others because the internet is slowly being restored in Bangladesh. So for about 11 days, starting July 17th, the government had imposed a communications blackout. And now a lot of images and videos have come out of what happened while the protests were going on. What do you know about what happened during that blackout?
Yeah, so we're now getting a much more complete picture of what happened. there had been a curfew in place. And after that, the government issued a shoot-on-sight order during curfew hours. Riot police and paramilitary forces had been deployed to monitor and control the situation. And there's been some pretty disturbing videos circulating showing sort of the brutality of law enforcement's response to the student protests and the intensity of the situation. So you're seeing government buildings on fire, police cars torched, which the government has been blaming on mobs with ties to the political opposition, saying that they seized the opportunity of the student protest to create chaos. And this is why they had to crack down.
Everyone is thinking the protesters who are students and then the government is there, they're having a clash. But that's not how it is. There's another factor in the equation, which is a third party. And the third party is the BNP and Jamaat terrorist and the anarchist who intruded into the equation and creating all this havoc.
You know, there's been videos of police firing rubber bullets, tear gas, lobbing sound grenades to disperse the tens of thousands of people that had come out onto the streets. There's also been accusations that police were using live ammunition against protesters. And the government, for its part, denies that live rounds were fired, but then you have hospitals saying that they've seen people who've died and been injured by bullets and shotgun pellets. So the students that we talked to also told us about their experience during the protests.
My hands are badly injured and my legs are also injured. And yes, I have been recovering physically, but am I recovering mentally? No, because I want justice.
Another activist that I spoke with, Nazifa Zahnat, also a protest organizer, she talked about seeing her friends get attacked. She said that there were snipers firing at them from the roofs.
They used sniper from helicopter. They shot bullet from helicopter in many sites. So when we were together, we couldn't even count that how many fellow students in our university are being attacked. It was a massacre.
Some pretty crazy stuff. Video has also emerged of one of the main protest coordinators saying that he was abducted, beaten, tortured by police.
A detective team picked me up, blindfolded me, and then later took me to a room in a building and interrogated me about the student protests and their strategies. They also mentally and physically tortured me until I became senseless.
And these are just some of the examples. You know, now we know that over 200 people were killed during these demonstrations. So overall, just a really violent couple of weeks.
Well, the government of Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina has faced a ton of criticism for not only the blackout that we were talking about, but also for the excessive use of force that you mentioned. And the blackout had been seen as a way to suppress this protest movement and that crackdown. And this criticism has come from human rights groups like Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, which is calling for an independent investigation. So how is the government responding to that?
They've arrested thousands of people, student leaders, protesters, members of the opposition who they say are responsible for the violence. And Sheikh Hasina, she's put the blame directly on her political opponents, specifically the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, the BNP, and the Jamaat-e-Islami Party.
BNP is instigating it. My question is, they're doing so many things. Who is patronizing them? You can find out who they're getting the financial help from.
She's blamed them for the violence that erupted during the protests, and she claims that they were responsible for the arson that forced the government to impose a curfew. She's also defended the government's actions, saying that the curfew and the internet shutdown, those things were necessary to protect the lives and property of the citizens. And she says she never wanted to impose these measures, but was forced to do this by the circumstances. Al Jazeera also interviewed the information and broadcast minister of Bangladesh, and he said things along similar lines.
It is not possible for the students to go inside all the government establishment and attacking and burning it down.
People I spoke to were furious about that interview and this general approach that the government is taking to responding to criticism, to taking accountability, including Tasneem.
If you had the speeches of the government and the Army League leaders, you would notice that they have no respect for the democracy or the people of this country.
The opposition that the government is blaming for the violence, I think the government, the Prime Minister should take the liability for her own action.
I also talked to Nazifa about this, and she said, and a lot of reporting has said, that it was the Chhatra League, which is the student wing of the ruling Awami League party, that actually started the violence by attacking the protesters.
The government, when we were doing our peaceful protest, they just used their student ally, Bangladesh Chhatra League, to beat us up. And then when we protected ourselves from there, they saw that, okay, this is not working. Then they ordered police to beat us, to shoot us.
The other thing that they really wanted to stress was that this was an organic movement, organized and carried out by the students with legitimate concerns, and that they were really frustrated by the way that the government was sort of trying to downplay their anger by blaming the opposition for how big it had become.
After the break, can Sheikh Hasina's government survive the growing frustration? So, Tamara, you have been reporting on this story for a few weeks now, and you're also part of the Bangladeshi diaspora, which has been really active on this topic. What has it been like for you to watch this unfold from afar?
We're a huge diaspora community with lots of ties back home, and there's been protests here in Toronto in solidarity with the students almost every day. I think the same thing is happening in many other parts of the world. What I found in reporting this out is that even though the international reporting on this is very sympathetic to the students inside the country and even inside the diaspora community, the conversation still really, it's polarized, including in the Bangladeshi media, which makes it hard to find objective analysis from inside the country. And then among ordinary people are scared to talk, even outside of Bangladesh, like people who are normally really outspoken on political issues in the country. So on one side, you have people who are really critical of the government. On the other side, you have people who are staunch defenders of the government and the government's narrative on this. They blame the opposition for the violence. And then you have this sort of big middle camp as well, who are really critical of the government's handling of the protests, but they're afraid to be overly critical or be too vocal about what they think because they're afraid of the alternative, which is a change in government and the BNP, the opposition party, coming into power, which is a party that's seen as more conservative, more right-wing.
Wow.
And, they're afraid of the direction that party would take the country into. And so those people have found themselves in kind of an uncomfortable situation.
Yeah. Well, Tamara, I know that you've been hearing from people that things have quieted down, seemingly for now, but that there are more protests that are being planned. Given that the quota for reserve jobs is going to be reduced, why are people still taking to the streets? What are the protests about now?
Yeah, the protests have evolved beyond just the initial focus on the quota system for government jobs. And demonstrators, they're now calling for broader political reforms. There's a number of demands that they have. They want Sheikh Hasina to acknowledge her role in the violence against students and to issue a public apology. They want a number of other politicians to resign. They want police personnel who are involved in the violence against students to be fired. They want the student wing of the ruling party, who again, they blame for instigating the violence. They want them to be banned from engaging in student politics. And in some ways, this has really become a political movement, an anti-Hasina movement. We're hearing a lot of calls for her to step down. Critics of hers say that she's become increasingly autocratic in the last 15 years, and that this movement is also an expression of the frustration that's been building up.
This is not about quota anymore. The people of Bangladesh is wanting that the autocratic regime, the fascist regime should step down. You would see the hashtag step down Hasina. It has become very popular.
Students we spoke to, like Nazifa, were heartbroken by the way that the government has responded to them, and they felt like they could be killed with no accountability, but they also sounded like they really had the motivation to keep going.
They just made us their enemy. We are just no one in this country. We can be attacked brutally. They has no accountability. We'll continue our movement as long as our demands are not being fulfilled. We were disconnected from each other. Now the internet connection has been regained. So now we are reorganizing for the movement.
Well, one of the things that we heard from protesters is a demand for Sheikh Hasina to step down. And she and her government have rejected those demands. Her information minister told Al Jazeera there was no reason for her to step down because she's doing everything she did to protect the people. But these calls have been growing louder and louder and more forceful. Can she survive this?
So what I've heard from people is that she may have gotten past the worst of this crisis and survived it. You know, people are on the streets again. The internet is slowly coming back. And the Supreme Court has reduced the quota, but the government isn't going to be able to go back to just business as usual because people want accountability. They feel like the government has been dismissive and refused to engage in any dialogue. And there's people who believe that that would make a huge difference for her and her government to sit down with them and to address their concerns. And, you know, as we talked about, this is now more than just about the quota movement at this point. It's about this growing list of frustrations that people have with this government. And this is something that came up a lot in my conversations with people, including with Tasneem.
My involvement goes beyond the issue of just quotas. It's also my dissatisfaction with the current government on many other fronts, including the disregard for democracy, equality, and rampant corruption that has been going on for years, and the ongoing crackdown on freedom of speech as well that also has been going on for years.
You know, if the government decides not to budge and continue with this high-handed approach, as people have been describing it, to the protesters' demands, the people that I've spoken to think that this is going to be an ongoing issue for this government. It's just going to keep coming up, and it's not something that people are going to forget very easily.
And that's The Take. This episode was produced by Tamara Khandaker, Amy Walters, and Sonia Bhagat, with Duha Musaad, Veronique Eshaya, Manahil Naveed, and me, Malika Bilal. It was edited by Alexandra Locke. Our sound designer is Alex Roldan. Alexandra Locke is The Take's executive producer, and Ney Alvarez is Al Jazeera's head of audio. We'll be back tomorrow.